All right. Well, welcome everybody. I would like to introduce to you our guest of honor. He is a WCC Sports Hall of Famer from our legendary 1971 football team. He's also an FBI or former FBI undercover agent and best-selling author of Making of Jack Falcone. And he's somebody who I've had the pleasure of getting to know over the last couple of years as part of our football alumni. And we're thrilled to have him here tonight. I'd like everybody to welcome Jack Garcia. Jack, how you doing?
Doing great. What an honor. Thank you very much, Michael, for inviting me, and to all the students and guests who took time out to listen to the podcast. Thank everyone.
Absolutely. It's great to have you, and we're excited to offer this opportunity to our student athletes and campus community to catch up with you and talk a little bit about your story and your time both at WCC as a student, as a football player, and then your career after WCC. So we have a lot of things to get to tonight. So again, if anybody has any questions, feel free to post them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end. And we will just start off, Jack, and Jack goes by a lot of different names. His name is Joaquin Garcia, but he'll maybe talk a little bit about some of his nicknames over the years. So sometimes he's known as Jacko, sometimes he's known as Jack Falcone, as I mentioned. But for tonight, we'll call him Jack. And Jack came here at the age of 9 years old, immigrated from Cuba, came at a time during the height of Castro and communist Cuba, followed his father who had come a year or two before and then worked in the New York area and ended up, calling for his family shortly thereafter. So, Jack, could you tell us a little bit about what it was like to come here at such a young age and, not knowing a soul and having to learn a new language and kind of, the new opportunities and the new challenges that moving to the U.S. Brought to you?
Yeah, it was quite frightening, to tell you the truth, Michael. I was 9 years old, and about a year and a half beforehand, the stormtroopers of Castro came into the house looking for my dad, who had evaded the country with the help of the FBI in Havana. And they were looking for him because he was a high government official. We had to move and relocate to another house, my grandparents' home. And then my father here in America was working 3 jobs, just trying to raise enough money to get us out of Havana. Now, what happened is about 6 months later, Castro came back, the stormtroopers of my parents, and invited my father to come back and join the revolution. But my father wanted nothing to do with that. So we finally came here after living almost 3 years under socialist Cuba, and came to New York, didn't speak a word of English, and we lived in a 5th floor walk-up in Washington Heights. And of course, I had to learn how to speak English. My father always pressed for an education. And then finally, after going to a public school, I was able to enroll at Mount St. Michael High School in the Bronx. But to me, my father believed in totally for us to learn the English language. We rehearsed so many times. We practiced because he knew that I had to learn in order to, I guess, be able to survive in America back in the 60s.
Great, great. Well, I'm glad you mentioned Mount St. Michael. We have a lot of students and student athletes who come from that school and end up attending WCC. So how was it that you came about ending up there and what was your time like? And in particularly, how'd you get involved in football?
Well, when I was in Cuba, we went to the Marist School, which is part of the Mount St. Michael Academy. So when we came here, we came with documents to enroll me at a Marist school. But unfortunately, not being able to speak a word of English, they made you take an entrance exam. And we all know how that went. It was horrible. So they wanted me to go into like 1st grade, and I was this big Mameluke. And my parents says, no, we're not going to send you to first grade. We're going to send you to public school. Public school had an ESL program, and that's where I learned. And then finally, when I started getting a grasp of the English language, not only learning in school, but also what my parents were trying to stress with us, I took a test, and we wound up being at Mount St. Michael. I think it was on the 6th grade or the 5th grade. And then from there, I went to the high school. We picked the Mount because such a beautiful place in the Bronx. We didn't do it for any athletic reasons. We just did it because it was a Marist school, and having been part of the Marist system in Cuba, my parents thought that this would be a good place for us to go. However, you know, it cost a lot of money. So we went with a lot, without a lot, when we were growing up, because my parents believed that they worked hard not to get us fancy things or fun things, but instead to pay for our education. So we went to the Mount, and I graduated from there, and started playing football at the Mount. I was, I believe, a sophomore playing ball. I didn't understand the game. Cubans usually are known for baseball. So I was terrible in baseball. So I started playing football, gradually started doing quite well. We got into a situation where we won the Catholic High School Football League. And from there, I got a scholarship out to Texas, where I went to school at West Texas State University for 1 year, actually.
Okay. And then, so West Texas State, you ended up making your way back home and then ultimately to WCC. So how did that come about?
Well, West Texas was a real eye-opener. What happened was, being from the Bronx, being Cuban, my grades really weren't that good at Mount St. Michael. So the offers that I did get to play football required me to go to a prep school. And just the thought of going back to high school really did not get me all excited about it. So West Texas came along. It was known as a bandit school. I mean, they had some really great talent there. And I figured, let me try Texas. But when I got there, it was totally a different world altogether. I mean, cowboy hats and boots, but there was no rodeo. That's just what everybody dressed and did. So it was kind of like a hard fit for me. And then the thing that made me leave West Texas State was that they changed the coaching staff. And the guy that they brought in, it was not somebody that I really liked. So I said, you know what? It's 1970. I want to come back home. I miss my family. I miss my friends. I came back to New York, and a couple of the guys that I had played with at Mount St. Michael were playing at Westchester Community. So they said, hey, we just started a football program there, and it's a bunch of great guys. Some of the guys that we played against in high school, some of the other schools like Evander, Child's School, as well as Clinton are playing there. So why don't you go out there? So I went out there, and I instantly fell in love. I mean, it was a great bunch of a great program. We had a great bunch of great talent there, and we wound up winning the national championship. So I found Westchester by luck, and it was because I had left West Texas. Prior to going to West Texas State, I never heard of Westchester Community. But when I got to see it, a beautiful campus like it was, it had like a sense of community. It had the people from everywhere, not only those from other Catholic high school programs, but out-of-towners, as well as public school. And we just hit it all off so good, and cohesive unit we became. And it was a great year of my life. Now, I was going to stay another year, but what happened is, unbeknownst to me, my father decides to move from the Bronx to Elizabeth, New Jersey. And it was one of these things at a dinner table. Oh, by the way, we bought a house and we're moving. So here I am, a kid in sophomore in college, thinking I'm going to go back to Westchester. And of course, it was a total shocker. So I went to see the football coach and said, Coach, I can't do the commute from Elizabeth, New Jersey, all the way to Westchester Community. So he said, don't worry about it. We're trying to get a place, a residence hall, because as you know better than anyone, we don't have a residence hall at Westchester Community. So I waited a while, and then I just couldn't wait anymore because I didn't want to do that drive. And a couple of friends of mine that I have played football with at West Texas State were at the University of Richmond. And they said, listen, I think we could talk to the coach. Would you be interested in going? I said, well, it beats having a commute. So I wound up leaving Westchester and going to the University of Richmond, where my first year I was redshirted, and then played the second, my junior and senior year. And it was a great experience for me. And one of the things that was kind of interesting, Michael, was that I originally, when I was being recruited by the University of Richmond, I told the coach, I said, listen, is it possible that I'm going to be academically eligible to play? He said, absolutely. But a week before we played University of North Carolina, they said that I would be redshirted. So I left the University of Richmond and came back to Westchester. And I'm grateful that the coach said to me, listen, you're losing an amazing opportunity. I said, you don't even see it. The fact that you're going to be redshirted, giving you one extra year of not only of eligibility, but opportunity for you to get your degree in. So he says, you could come back to Westchester Community, but you're not going to play for me. I says, you need to reevaluate this and go back to Richmond. And I think that was probably the best advice that I've ever got, because I was able to go back to the University of Richmond, do that extra year that helped me get my college degree. And I think that's what brought me where I am today. I mean, maybe things would have been different if he would have taken me back, and then what? But he knew that the University of Richmond was a good school. He knew that this was a great opportunity to be redshirted. And this is during a time when redshirting was not popular. It was quite rare. So really what you did for a year, you were on the meat squad. You practiced against, and yes, it was hard, but it was a great opportunity. And I'm grateful that I was able to graduate with that extra year of credit.
Right. Well, that was great advice. And, imagine that the coach who just won a national championship and is losing one of their star players, I'm sure someone who helped bring him that championship, to say no, and you need to do what's best for you.
Yes, that is
a tough thing for him to say.
It was, and I resented it at first. I was angry, like, hey, we're a team, and the guys on the team were also angry, and I just didn't understand it. But as you get older and you go through life and you say, you know what, that's probably the best advice I ever got. And because of that, I was able to graduate from a fine school like the University of Richmond. So to me, what I got on the football field, the coaching staff of Westchester, and the great team that we had from all over, I think made me not only a better person or an FBI agent, but also certainly made me a better player.
Okay. I was just curious, what was your major while you were at WCC? Did you know you wanted to get into law enforcement even then, or no?
Everybody asked me that, Michael. I had no clue, not only when I was at West Texas, not only when I was at Westchester, not only when I was at Richmond, until the senior year, when before some games, the coach would take the team out to see a movie to kind of keep you from getting into trouble, right? So the movie they chose was Serpico. Now, I don't know if anybody's seen Serpico, but it's Al Pacino. And it's all Al Pacino being an NYPD officer going undercover and trying to stop corruption, the mob, and crimes in general. So I saw this and I said, my God, this is what I want to do. I said, who would not want to be a cool guy like Al Pacino, who lives in the village, has a smoking hot girlfriend, drives a motorcycle, and also he owns an old English sheepdog. I said, that's what I want to do. I want to become a police officer. I want to go in law enforcement. So I chose to pick the greatest law enforcement agency in the world, the FBI. So I immediately went and I applied. But the problem was I wasn't hearing from the FBI. Then I got a little disenchanted. I put in applications at the NYPD, every law enforcement, but at that time they weren't hiring. In the mid-'70s, they weren't hiring. And then finally, I'm watching Univision, and I see the guy in Univision. I see this non-native Spanish speaker, FBI agent, butchering Spanish, and he's saying how we're looking for Spanish-speaking agents to come in the bureau. So I said, well, wait a minute, that's me. I already applied. Why haven't I heard? So I called the FBI and I said the next day, get my application going. You guys are advertising. I'm right here. You don't have to look any further. The guy calls me back. He says, the reason why you didn't hear from us is you're not an American citizen. I had to go through the process of becoming an American citizen. I always saw myself as an American citizen. I mean, you know, you're just a kid. You get adopted by this wonderful country. So I assumed I was one. So I went through the process, which, by the way, it's a very tough process. And this is before 9/11. So they were a little, you know, relaxed with me. But I had to learn all kinds of, like, who are your senators, your congressmen, the Bill of Rights, et cetera, et cetera. They gave me the opportunity to become a citizen of this great country. And in 1976, the bicentennial year, that's when I became a citizen. Then I immediately called the FBI, and they said, listen, I'm back on track. I'm a citizen. I'm ready to go out. This is what I want to do. Well, unbeknownst to me, what was happening in the back, in the scenes in the back, was that because Cuba is a communist country, they, of course, had to take a little more effort in looking into my background. As far as polygraph is concerned, as far as background checks. And then when I filed for a Freedom of Information Act after I got in, I saw there was a lot of letters and memos from the CIA saying, in as much as he is Cuban, the possibility that he could be a mole could exist. But the Bureau overlooked that, took a chance in me, and I was the second FBI agent, Cuban-born FBI agent in the Bureau's history, something I'm very proud of. And besides becoming an American citizen of this great country, also be an opportunity to get in the FBI, which I became an agent in 1980.
Wow. Wow, that's something I didn't know from your book. And I appreciate you filling us in on that. I know that you had a couple of stops before you actually went into the FBI. If I'm not mistaken, you played semi-pro football for a little while.
Yes.
Right out of the University of Richmond. So what was
Yes.
that experience like?
I played, there was a team in Jersey called the Jersey Oaks. And it really consisted of a lot of guys who love to play the game. And they have not a shot to play pro ball, but love the game to play. So there were guys from everywhere, from Rutgers, UConn, this and that. And we won the championship, actually, the New York City championship with that. Did we make money? Very little money, if any. But it was just a fun. But while I was doing that, I started working at a Union College, New Jersey, another community college, as the director of testing and counseling. And then after that, I got an appointment to be working as an investigator at the Union County, New Jersey prosecutor's office. So that was my first taste of being in law enforcement. And I had the bug while in the shadows, the FBI was investigating me and going through my background, my neighborhood investigations, until finally one day I was at the prosecutor's office and they told me, they said, listen, the FBI is going to hire you. So, I mean, I was delighted. It had to be one of the greatest times. But what happens when you get in the FBI, you have to go to Quantico. And at that time was 16 weeks. But you don't, just because you made it there, you're not really an FBI agent until you graduate to 16 weeks. And it's pretty tough. I mean, they hit you with the physical part of it. They hit you with the academics and, of course, firearms. So afterwards, if you pass and failing is below 85, you then get your appointment to be a special agent of the FBI, which I did. I mean, I went to work in Newark, New Jersey, and I was put right working fugitives, bank robberies, and terrorists, which I felt like very happy about doing that, because usually when you start off, you get placed on the applicant squad, you get placed your way around to, you know, you're a probationary officer. But because they needed Spanish speakers like myself, that's where, you know, you got to keep in mind, the demographics of the FBI didn't really match with the demographic of our society. At that time, everybody looked like an FBI agent. You know, they wore the three-piece suits, the wingtip shoes that we used to call 1,000 eyes, and everybody kind of looked what your typical FBI agent. Along I come, kid from Cuba, kid from the Bronx, a kid who was kind of different. I was somebody that, you know, I was kind of different, so to speak. But when I came out of the FBI, I wanted to be an Efren Zimbalist Jr., you know, before becoming Al Pacino type in Serpico. So what happened is it wasn't until the FBI got involved in narcotics, which was in the very early 80s, 82, 84, that the fact that I spoke Spanish, I was a shoo-in to start working undercover cases with drug trafficking organizations from Colombia, Mexico, Dominican Republic, and Cuba. So that was like my entree into undercover work, solely because I was at the right place at the right time, and I had the skill set of being able to speak Spanish, and also because I grew up in the Bronx. I was an outgoing guy. I was around people of all types of races, and you know, it takes a special type of person to become an undercover agent. It's not something that you could teach. You either have it or you don't. So I was blessed to do that, and I started working undercover. And then I look back in my career, and 24 out of my 26 years was solely dedicated to working undercover with the FBI.
So at some point you ended up in the role that you ended up writing your book about, Making of Jack Falcone. So at some point you became Jack Falcone. What year was that again?
That was in 2000 and almost 2003.
So there was a period of time starting out in the early 80s when you first started and you got involved in narcotics, and I imagine you worked a lot of different cases. And as you mentioned, what was it that prepared you for that assignment, when you ultimately got to the point which I know we're going to talk about in a minute here?
Yeah, well, it's interesting about that, Michael, is that I worked over 100 major undercover operations, okay, and countless by bus. Again, because we were working in narcotics, speaking the language, and being able to, you know, to work the streets, so to speak. I was used a lot, and I don't want to use the word used because that sounds like I didn't want to. That was what I was happy doing. And I felt that was my little niche. Like in the FBI, you have amazing agents that are case agents who handle complex investigations. You have agents who are great surveillance agents. This was the little niche that I came to play. So all of that background that I did, the many cases that I worked, prepared me for this. However, when that came to me at first, it was a shocker, because the agent, who is Italian, his name is Nat Parise, he says, look, I got this case up in the Bronx of these Albanians and mobsters. What do you think? You think you want to work it? So, of course, I never worked traditional organized crime. All I ever worked was dope and corruption and all of that. I never worked organized crime. So I said, well, look, I don't really know this. He goes, yeah, well, we're going to try to pass you off as an Italian. I says, you got to be kidding me. I says, I'm Cuban, born and bred. I eat rice and beans. How am I going to do that? He says, don't worry about it. I'll teach you what you need to know. And he kind of did this ad hoc class where he started teaching me the do's and don'ts, to learn about what organized crime was all about. You know, it's totally different than working narcotic organizations. He then started putting me through creating a background on me. I spoke to informants. These were guys who were either made men or guys who were part of the mob. And as I listened to their stories became my stories. So I would be able to educate myself and look like, hey, I was this guy who grew up around Italians, and I was, one of those guys. You know what I mean? But what happened was, the system or the scenario that they crafted for me was that I was raised in Miami, Florida. And there in Miami, Florida, I hung around a lot of Cubans. So I was involved in the drug trade. And then I came up to the Bronx and I was going to be an owner of a strip club. And there I got to know some of the owners. They got to know me. They did the vouching for me. And that's how I slowly, gradually got in. But how we got into this case is really amazing. What happened was there was a strip club in the Bronx that was being shaken down by the Albanian mob. And the Albanians were coming in demanding protection money. So, of course, the owner said, hey, listen, we're not paying you. We got enough problems here. It's tough doing business. He said, no, you will pay us. And this is what you're going to pay us. And if you don't pay us, you're going to have problems here. So sure enough, like the next week, the guy comes looking for money. He doesn't get any money. They destroy the place. A couple of the owners go and they come to us and they said, look, I'm getting shaken down by this. He says, we said, go back and talk to them and see what happens. Well, the next day, the Albanians don't come back, but a wise guy comes back, all dressed up with his beautiful suit, alligator shoes. And hey, how you doing? I says, I hear you got a little problem. He says, we can make your problem go away, but you got to pay us for that. So it was your textbook extortion case. You create a situation and you produce a solution. So we went back to the drawing board and they said, Jack, we're going to enter you into this case. And I went in the following week and I gave the mob guys $5,000 to ensure that the Albanians were not going to come in. And sure enough, since that, the Albanians never came in. We were working then with this particular group. And the guy actually that we were working with went to Cardinal Spellman in the Bronx. So we were working this guy and really coming to a lot of ends. And then Greg De Palma came out of prison. Greg De Palma was this colorful gangster who owned the Westchester Premier Theater, which is the place to go besides Las Vegas. That's where the who's who played. And this was up in Scarsdale. They had Sonny and Cher, Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Dionne Warwick, Diana Ross, Elvis Presley, you name it, played there, and the place was a mob joint. So he comes out of prison and he reclaims that strip club, and we're thinking, what are we going to do? How do we continue with this guy who came in to shake us down, or do we go and hitch our wagon to Greg De Palma? Well, the reason why we chose to hitch our wagon to Greg De Palma is because Greg De Palma liked to talk, and we in the FBI love to listen. So I was a microphone, and I hung out with him. At first, it was a little scary because he had some accountability issues with the Gambinos, because while he was in prison, he tried to whack another Gambino. So that had to be resolved. And then, of course, I started hanging out with him, became close to him. I ultimately became his driver. So we knew in the FBI where he was going, who was he going to meet, and more important, who and what the meeting was about. So it was like in hindsight, it was the greatest move that we were able to connect with Greg De Palma, because he had this penchant of just talking. He was known, John Gotti called him the Typhoid Mary of organized crime. But that was what we wanted. We don't want a guy that's a steel trap. We want a guy who's going to talk. And we learned a lot. We learned about the structure, who was running the family after John Gotti. We learned what their rackets were. And then ultimately at the end, we were able to take down 32 guys, the first wave. Then we took others on the second wave. And we learned a lot about what the Gambino crime family was doing in the Bronx and Westchester.
Well, before we get too far down the road with your work with Greg De Palma, I have a couple questions as someone who's of Italian descent. Of course, there's a lot of there's food, there's freezing, there's an element of the Italian culture that I imagine you had to learn. So how was it that you were able to learn all those little details to make yourself so believable in those early stages?
Listen, that was the best part of my training. The Italian people know how to eat. And it's one of those things that I'm sure is the way in your house, Mike. If I go in your house where your mom lives, the first thing he wants to do is feed me. Okay. So just like with Greg De Palma like to talk and we like to listen, Italians like to cook and I like to eat. So it was a perfect marriage. So yes, I had to learn, but here was the catch. The scenario that I set up, not just me, of course, the case agents as well, was that I was a third generation Sicilian whose parents grew up in Miami. Now, Miami is flooded with Cubans, okay? So it was pretty much, I was away from my ethnic roots. And then, of course, we even created that my parents died at an early age. Now, just as a little hindsight, because you're dealing with the mob, which is unlike dealing with dopers. See, when you deal with a doper, you have no accountability with them. They don't need to ask you where you're going or where have you been, why haven't I heard from you? But in the mob, it's a different structure. There is deference there that you have to show. There is heavy duty accountability. So knowing that, they told me is we have to dot our I's and cross our T's. So I literally went to Miami and I had to look for a Mr. and Mrs. Falcone who had died. And bingo, we found one in the same cemetery where Jackie Gleason is buried. Now, why do you ask we do that? Well, obviously, let's say I'm with Greg De Palma or another soldier out with him in Florida. And then out of the clear, doesn't have to be any kind of like him doubting who I am, says, hey, you know what? Your parents, you were from here, right? And I go, yeah. He says, why don't we go show their respect? We'll get some flowers. We'll pay them a visit. We'll show. Now, what would you do, Michael? I couldn't afford that. I needed to make sure that I had every base covered. So I had the Mr. and Mrs. Falcone graveside that I would take them, put the flower, shed some tears, and hope that the family of those Falcones didn't show up and hit me over the head with a stick. So these are the kind of things that you do with the mob. You had to make it is so bizarre the way that culture works. Actually, I remember giving the old man a phone. Okay. Now the phone, of course, we were bugging his phone. All right. And at that time it was the Nextels, which are radio phones. You could talk to somebody like you're doing a walkie-talkie. And he would call me no matter what. One time I'm down in Florida working another case. He zaps me on the phone. He says, Jackie boy. I didn't answer. I turned it off, right? I come back to New York the next day. He says, where were you? And I goes, I was down in Florida. I was trying to angle up a deal. So he says, I called you and you didn't call me back. How do I know you weren't busted last night? I says, what are you talking about? Because from now on, wherever I call you, you pick up that phone. Do you understand me? I don't care what time of day it is. Now, those were instructions he gave the crew. Now, my wife's family mother passes away. We're at a wake. All right. I can't tell the mob guys that my mother-in-law passed away because they'll come, show their respect, bring flowers or whatever they do. I can't afford that because what are they going to do? They're going to sit in a pew and next door is going to be Aunt Matilda and she's going to say, oh, you guys work at the FBI too? You know? So I didn't. So here I am grieving with my wife and the family. In comes the phone. Jackie boy, where are you? I had to go outside and answer that phone. And I'm fortunate that my wife understood. Now, the reason why I did that, because it would have set me back, Michael, you know, and in that world of the mob, that accountability word, that's not good. You know, I would get calls from the old man sometimes at 2 a.m, telling me he's watching TNT, watching Rio Bravo. He wasn't calling me to check where I was. He was calling me just to make sure that I was okay. So that was the most difficult part about working this undercover than it was any previous undercover cases. Because if one of these dopers ever called me looking for me, I won't pick up. And then if I see them, I get on their face and tell them that they never do that again. But so everything I had to learn, I learned from the case agent. I learned from the informants. I'm so grateful for that. But I had to learn, you know, like, hey, I was raised with Cubans, but I had to know the right pronunciation of food. You don't say Braciole, it's Brajol. So I had to have some kind of lineage where I understood. But these mob guys, you would think, the way Hollywood glamorizes them, that they all speak Italian. Maybe one or two guys I've met spoke Italian. They were all English speakers, you know? So there was not a need for that. I really thought that they weren't going to buy my act. I really thought it wasn't, but nobody questioned it. So why? My opinion with that is because of the greed factor. They saw me as the goose that laid the golden egg. I always did the right thing, which is what you're supposed to do in the mob, and that is money for the mob flows up, never goes down. So if you make a score, you got to give a little taste to your captain. You got to give a taste to the soldiers, et cetera, et cetera. So I think by playing the rules, making myself as an earner, they felt somehow overlooked any kind of peccadillo that I would have. They were like, okay, this guy is good. But I was fortunate. I grew up in that area. Every day that I went out there, I kept thinking somebody's going to show up and, expose me. Happened a couple of times, but I was able to resolve it. But it was a challenge to me. See, when you work undercover, it becomes like a drug, like you understand what the psychology of those who are hooked on drugs. It's kind of like you feel good and you feel there's nothing better than looking at the guy in the eye, racing that toast, that drink, and you're looking at him and you're saying, this guy is buying all of my stuff. He's believing me, and that is what undercovers do. It's a kind of like you're an actor, except we don't have second takes. There's only one take for us.
Wow.
And if you mess that up, you're gone. But you get comfortable in time, and the more you did it, you felt, a little more comfortable. You never drop your guard, because if you did, you could wind up in the back of a trunk somewhere.
So as you mentioned earlier, the work you did on that case led to a lot of convictions and different waves of convictions and everything. And I know it was a multifaceted case. You mentioned that you had to lay some groundwork before you got in, but when you did get in, you got in at a pretty high level. In other words, you didn't have to work your way up as some unknown person with associates. You were able to, as you said, hitch your wagon to a part of the case at a high level of the mob structure with Greg De Palma. Can you just talk a little bit about how, where he kind of stood in the pecking order of things and just what it meant to the FBI to have you working at that level so quickly?
Well, how the structure of organized crime is the same, whether you go to the New York Five Families or you go to Kansas City or wherever. It's set up in a way that there is the boss, the underboss, and the consigliere, or the counselor. Okay, that's called the administration. Below them are your captains, below them are your soldiers, and then comes your associates. Okay, usually an associate, it's linked to a made man, a foot soldier. And then in time, he would recommend that to the captain, like, hey, this guy's got the making of being straightened out to be one of us. Now, how do you become one of those? Well, the mob doesn't advertise in the classifieds. They don't look for wanted a leg breaker, wanted an earner. Okay, what you do is over time you prove yourself. You're a kind of guy who keeps his mouth shut. You're a guy who plays by the rules. You're a guy who knows the system where money flows up, not down. You're a guy who's capable of doing prison time and capable of violence. Once you meet that criteria, you're done. So fortunately for us, we found Greg, when he came out, he had some issues. And the issues was, one of them was a guy that he proposed, he tried to whack in prison because the guy was not collecting money for him on the streets while Greg was in prison. The other issue that Greg had was his son, who was also a made guy, who had no business being in the mob, but he got straightened out and he was a soldier assigned to John Gotti's crew, John Gotti Jr.'s crew. Now, he cooperated. Then he rescinded his cooperation, but the wise guys knew about it. And then what happened is Greg found out about what happened, and they found him hung in his cell. So when I was out there, Greg was able to get his son out of prison into a nursing home with a compassionate release. But the wise guys looked at him a little differently. So what did Greg do? Greg was great for going the extra yard. So money, like I said, flows up. So instead of giving the guy 5 or 10% of whatever you make, Greg will give 20, 25%. He always thought that the money you kept giving up always helped you in the end. So Greg was a kind of easy target to hook up with because he was trying to get back into being a captain like he was. And it was all about the right time and timing. We hit it off. I think that's also helps too. You know, he liked me. I hated him. But of course, I never let him know that, you know, and I wound up, he trusted me so well that he proposed me for membership. Unfortunately, the Bureau did not go with it. I felt that it was a short-sighted move, but regardless, Greg De Palma was a perfect guy for us. And because he took this liking to me, I think I was able to bypass, and there were guys in the crew that were jealous because soldiers were not even that close with Greg, yet I was. He would call me every day, tell me this, go here, drive me. So it was all around perfect timing. Now, could we duplicate that again? I don't know, but I was fortunate to have gotten in with him and he being needy, and I was the guy who was there for him.
Yeah. Well, one of the most fascinating things that I got out of your book was the fact that you were working on so many cases at the same time. And as you mentioned, you know, you're at a funeral, you're on call. You're down in Miami, you're on call. You're on vacation with your family, you're on call. How was it that you were able to work so many cases at once and continue to work for the FBI in so many different capacities at the same time?
It was not by design. What happened is because I worked undercover for so many years, a guy would say, listen, I got a quick case down in Florida. It just deals with you showing up, doing a cameo, and the end of that. Well, that usually would lead to something more, okay? Now I'm smack in the middle of another case. But how I used it to my benefit was that I told the guys working the case, I said, listen, I'll go to Florida. I'll fly down there, come back the same day or the next day, but I need to have some kind of taste for him. I need to give him money. You know, I had to show some kind of tribute that I'm down there doing a score. So it'll be like Pavlov. When I say, I got to go to Atlantic City, he would salivate because he knew when I returned from Atlantic City, I gave him $2,000. I gave him maybe a stolen television set. I gave him some iPods. So that was what was able to, how I was able to do these cases. And he would sometimes say to me, if I was laying low, like in New York, he would say, Jackie boy, when you going back down to Florida? Because he knew, like Pavlov, he knew that, hey, you go to Florida, I'm going to get something. So this thing blossomed where I was doing so many cases at one time, but there were none that were able to compromise any one of them. So in other words, I was working in Atlantic City. I was working the city council members there. I was in Florida working 2 separate police departments, Hollywood corruption cops, as well as the Broward Sheriff Department. I was working up in Boston with some dirty cops up in Boston. I was doing drug deals in New York with Colombians. So I was always doing some kind of case. Now, listen, what I did was good for the Bureau, but it wasn't good for Jack Garcia. I mean, it was stressful, yes. And, you know, listen, I know about undercover. I taught in the Undercover Academy. Undercover plays mind games with people. I've seen great people who get affected by it, people who can't handle it, people who break up their marriage, people who go into drinking, all kinds of issues, not just with the FBI, but with law enforcement in general. You know, I was lucky I didn't have to. The only thing I did was I would eat. I mean, I go with the Italians. I'm eating everything like I'm going to the chair. Then I go with the dirty cops. Hey, forget about it. Bring out the food. You know, so that's kind of how I dealt it. But in hindsight, I should have never done that. I should have stuck to just doing one case. But it just evolved into that. And do I have any regrets doing it? I love doing it. I can complain about it, but you know, at the end, we put some serious bad guys away in jail. We took down some dirty cops. We took down some dirty politicians, some murder for hires, Russian organized crime, Asian organized crime. I mean, that's what you sign up to become. You want to put people away in jail that deserve it. And I was fortunate to have gotten that opportunity and to have worked among some of the most amazing men and women in the FBI. I mean, as well as task force, drug squad I worked, we had 20 detectives on the NYPD side. Plus we had 20 of the greatest agents I've ever worked with. And every day we're in Jackson Heights in Little Columbia, locking up drug dealers, seizing coke, seizing heroin, seizing money. I mean, that's what you join. I mean, you don't join law enforcement. You could sit up and go to Dunkin' Donuts, because if you are, then you need to reevaluate your life. So I was blessed to have been 26 years of high intensity. Not just me, the guys that worked with me, the many agents that did what I was doing, they were right there in the mix too.
Yeah. So I imagine, like you said, it's a stressful life and everything. What was it like with your family and trying to balance your family life with work life?
Very tough at first, you know, but fortunately my wife's father was an NYPD detective. So she knew the life, okay? And she was understanding. And I think I'm kind of grateful. And I think the success that I had is because of her. Because, you know, when you're out there doing undercover, you need a clear head. You know, she knew that if I missed Christmas, she knew if I missed Thanksgiving, she knew if I missed my daughter's recital, okay, I was working. So she knew that. And instead of saying, she goes, you go ahead and do what you got to do. It wasn't like, oh my God, jumping on me. What am I going to do? You didn't need that stress. So I am indebted to her as well as to my daughter. My daughter at that time my daughter was born in the year 2000. And when I was out there when she was 3 to 5 years old, I mean, think about it. I missed all kinds of school events, and they would say, hey, bring your daddy to work to school day. Oh, I can't go. What am I, Jack Falcone? I'm an associate in the Gambino crime family, you know, and just my whole change, because I never came home. I had apartments throughout New York City, some for different cases. I had different wardrobes. I had my suit, pinky ring, Rolex. Then I had my Guayaberas with Juvenia watches and my Santeria ring. So it was always different cars, different life. It was like, it was wild. You would have never like recognized me because I was too, you know, out there all the time. And I was consumed with work, which again goes back to what I did was great for the Bureau, but not great for me. In hindsight, I should have never done that. But it's behind us. I'm not the only one who did that. There's everybody in my teams were out there knocking it too. So
Sure.
we all sacrificed for the greater good.
Wow. Well, so was there ever a time during your work, either in the Falcone case or others, where you felt like you got in too deep, or you were questioning, you know, the relationships that you had and whether you really wanted to bust them or put somebody away or anything like that?
I write that in my book about one guy in particular in Atlantic City. Like, this guy was helping me launder money, okay? And then all of a sudden, greed kicked in, and now he's becoming a drug dealer. Now he wants to be a drug dealer. He's going to set me up with dope. And I told him, what are you doing? He says, we're not doing that. We're doing this. Don't get involved in all that stuff. That leads to trouble. He didn't listen. He got locked up for dope. I've also had guys who I bought heroin from, multiple kilos. Oh, I've never done this before. Now, sure, you hear that after you arrest the guy. But here you got a guy who I really believe he didn't. I try to talk this guy out of it. And then you sit there and mental scale and go, this heroin is going to be sold no matter what. It's going to go out there and poison our kids, poison our society. I got to do it. I got to take them down. So you would take these people down, and then when you get them sitting, goes, what did I tell you? What is wrong with you? Try to talk you out of, well, I needed the money. So go work at McDonald's. Go work 5 jobs. Go work cleaning streets. This is now you're going away for 10, 20 years of your time. For what? What were you going to make on a kilo? You're going to make 5, 10,000? Is that worth it? So, you know, you saw that a lot. Also with the dirty cops. I was working with one guy in Hollywood that I write in my book. Guy was the nicest guy you want to meet. Even being on the job to go for a drink with this guy was fun. He was funny, he was witty, but he crossed the line. And, you know, he guarded dope for me. He did all kinds of crazy things that you're not supposed to do. And for that, he got sentenced to, I think, 19 years in prison. Wow. You know, so, you know, people get lost along the way, but, you know, it's a shame that you see that, but if we're not policing that, who is, you know? And that's why, yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. Early in the conversation, you mentioned the idea that, you know, you just work the case every day and hope that you didn't, you know, they wouldn't make you or something, or you wouldn't be found out that you were convincing and all that. Was there ever a time during your work where you were really scared that you know, that your life was in danger, or you know, or that you would get found out?
You know, every time you rob with these guys, a lot of these guys are sociopaths that they could just be triggered by whatever. So, you know, you got to keep your focus at all time. But from a personal perspective, the scariest part was after I joined the union for the mob, picture that, you joined the union, they joined the unions for benefits, etc. We all go for physicals, you know? So we walk into the physical, they diagnosed me of having atrial fibrillation, which is an irregular heartbeat. Mm-hmm. Now, the old man saying, what are you doing? He says, come on, we got to go eat, you know? It's always eat, something about eating. So I said, look, let me handle this with the doctor. They give me a Holter monitor, which is a device, and they put the EKG things on you. And they said, you document everything you do during the course of a day and come back here tomorrow, and we're going to analyze how bad your atrial fibrillation is. So here I go to meet him at the diner, 5 or 6 wise guys sitting around the table. We're eating like we're going to the chair. You know, it's just bacon this, sausage here, eggs there. You know, we're having a feast. And suddenly the old man gets up and he says, we got a problem. There's a rat among us. So everybody's going, who? A rat? Who's this rat? We'll kill the guy. And we go, we got a rat among. Who is the guy? He walks over, his Jackie boy. He rips my shirt and you see the little EKG markers on it, right? I'm like humming, you know, like you're really in a panic, like what's going to happen next? And I see the guys, it froze, time froze. And they were kind of like trying to get up. I thought I was going to get a beating right there or something. And then finally Greg laughed. He had to put that in his heart. He's got atrial fibrillation, boys. I said, we need you around, Jackie boy. Get well, right? Next day I go back to the doctor. I hand him my Holter monitor. He gets to the spot. This thing is off the freaking wall. He said, what happened here? I says, Greg De Palma happened there. So, but anyway, so what happened was the scary part of it, my heart was diagnosed. So now I'm thinking, this is where how complicated my world was. I got to deal with my wife. If she finds out I have atrial fibrillation, okay, that's it. You're quitting your job. You're stressing yourself out. If I tell the FBI, you're quit, you're out of this case, you're done. Okay? I had to juggle and come up, fortunately, to one of the case agents. I'm not giving up anybody, that we just kind of let it sift. I did take my medication. To this day, I still have atrial fibrillation. But that was the scariest part because I really didn't know how this was triggered. But I was worried about this happening to me, dying out there, or the possibility would be that I couldn't even call Greg De Palma to tell him, hey, I'm not going to be around because then he'll want to come visit. See, you develop a relationship with bad guys, and they do what good guys do too. Like if you were sick, we come by and see you. How you doing? You need anything? Well, they do the same thing. But what do your life is your life. But when you have a make-believe life, well, where is your family? Where, you know what I mean? This is where you live. And so that was to me the roughest part to juggle. Fortunately, I was able to do it, and I continue with the case, with the medication, and God bless, I'm still here.
Well, thank God for that. Before we get to, I want to leave some time for some question and answer. I'm sure there's some people who have some questions for you. I wanted to talk a little bit about a message to our students. But before that, if you would just kind of maybe just summarize what life was like in the Bureau and even after you retired since that case. I know that case closed and then, you know, there was a few more years before you ended up retiring. Is that right?
Well, after the case closed, I had to prepare for the trial, and then I was doing other cases. When I retired, I was on a contract with the Bureau to still work undercover.
Oh, okay.
Then what happened, I was approached to do a book from several people. I figured, let me, you know, chronicle my life and pursue it. And then finally, when the book was nearing opening, I just said, look, I'm out. I introduced other undercovers, or the case terminated, and I went on my own way. Now I'm involved with an animal rescue group on Long Island called the Guardians Rescue, where I run their corporate, not corporate, but their security, and mostly like liaison with police officers once we identify some abuse or neglect of animals, because we feel that's the way I'm dealing with it now. I'm representing those who can't help themselves. You know, I'm helping our four-legged friends. And so that's keeping me, you know, quite busy with that. But yeah, once I left the Bureau, I miss it terribly. I miss working undercover, but I miss it working undercover with the guys and gals that I was working with. I mean, these people were amazing. They really made sure that I made it home, that I was safe, and I needed my tools that I needed to do my job. And for that, I'm forever grateful. I don't miss the administrative minutia that goes on in the Bureau. Sometimes there are people who have no business being in the Bureau. I view them as, you know, they're just blocks, the blocks that you have to overcome, you know. But I do miss the days of working. I mean, I went from driving a captain in the Gambino crime family to driving my 5-year-old daughter. And to be honest with you, it's about the same. They both want things. My daughter wants cookies, ice cream. Frank De Palma wants this. He wants to beat this guy. He wants money from that guy.
Wow, that is quite the visual there, you know. You know, you're pulling up the SUV or the
Hummer, the H2 I had.
I remember it was a Hummer.
I had every car. I had the Hummer, I had a Rolls, I had S500. And then I break, and what do I got? I got nothing. You know, it's like you went from this dream world. I had to turn in everything. I even had to turn in, are you ready for this? All my clothes, all the suits that I have, Briones, my Zegna suits, my alligator shoes. I had to turn in my underwear. Who would want my underwear?
Not one souvenir, huh?
You can't. My jewelry, I got stripped of my 4-carat pinky ring, the obligatory pinky ring, my Rolex watches that I had, my gorgeous ties, my car. I mean, I used to walk around with a wad of money. I had like a knot of about maybe 5 G's. Now I'm lucky I got cents and dimes and nickels. So it does change you. And it's funny because people always ask me, it's like, I remember going out to the restaurant with the guys, would bring the mob guys, would bring the strippers from the strip club. We take over a restaurant, waiters tripping themselves over us, right? Now I get sent to like, your table's not ready, Mr. Garcia. You're over there by the bar. And then go back and forth. My table ready, sir? My table. We didn't tolerate any of that garbage when I was out there. But these are adjustments that come. But I'm living a good life.
It's like Henry Hill at the end of Goodfellas, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a tough adjustment to go from undercover to do that. But you know what? It's in hindsight, I love it. I do it again in a heartbeat. And I just it was tough. It was tough at first adjusting, but it is what it is.
Yeah, well, you have an amazing story, and I know we could talk all night. I just want everyone to be clear that Jack's not here to sell a book or anything, but he did write a book. It's called The Making of Jack Falcone, and I want to just point it out to everybody, just because I really think it's a fascinating read, and anybody could benefit from learning his story and what he had to go through in his life and what he achieved. And what he worked really, really hard for throughout his life. And I think it's relatable to what a lot of local students and a lot of Westchester Community College students are going through. I mean, first off, you mentioned to yourself that when you came to this country, you weren't a citizen. We have a large Hispanic population at WCC. We have a certain amount of students that are undocumented. And we have dreamers and students who are looking for a path forward, trying to better their lives there by getting an education and everything. And, I'm really interested to know, what would your message be to them based on what you experienced throughout your life?
Listen, this is a great country. I am forever grateful, as is my family, to have given this opportunity to come to America. I mean, we were well-to-do in Cuba. We had everything you could possibly ask for. Then our life was disrupted with this guy Castro and communism. But America welcomed us with open arms. It's a beautiful country. And, I am forever grateful of that. And I have only a few of really great points of highlights in my life. And one of them was, of course, becoming an American citizen here in this country. Opportunities for me at Westchester were great. It's like a melting pot at Westchester Community College. And that's what I think was great about it. It kind of humbled you. It also taught you how to get along with everyone, not be just sitting around with a certain type of people. You expose yourself to all of them. And that's what I think Westchester did for me. And again, owing Westchester the opportunity that I was able to continue with my studies at the University of Richmond. But it's a great country, and respect it just like it respects you. It respects all of us.
And for our student athletes in the audience, how about what you were able to achieve through playing football, and what did that sport bring you, and how do you kind of evaluate your experience based on where you ended up in life?
Well, Westchester was great. It gave me an opportunity to play good football. I mean, we had a team that played 4-year colleges. I mean, we played Marist, New Haven, and we beat them all. I mean, we had a really sound team, and there were guys from everywhere at the school. And also, you look back on it, of course, gave me the opportunity to get a full scholarship to the University of Richmond. Plus, they gave me an extra year, which I'm grateful to be redshirted. Also, 2 other individuals from Westchester went also to the University of Richmond. We've had some great caliber of athletes at Westchester Community College. One is Sean Lee, who played 11 seasons with the San Diego Chargers, and the other one was Andre Herrera, who is like a brother to me. He went on to lead the nation, actually behind Tony Dorsett in most yards accumulated. So the talent was always here. New York is loaded with talent. There are other people that don't go to these other schools because the opportunities are not possibly given to them. Or maybe they need that little extra push. And to do it at a place like Westchester Community, when you're home and you have access to great coaches and a great AD on your behalf, Michael, you really do care for the program, which is something that's very important. It helps people go on to improve and better their lives, like it did with me. I mean, when I was at Westchester, I would have never thought that I would be on 60 Minutes, that I would have written a book, that I was an FBI agent, for crying out loud. But it prepared me for all of this, and I owe this back. I'm very proud to tell people that I'm a Westchester Community College graduate. Some people say, well, I don't want to list on being a community college. Hey, that's one of my highlights of my life. I'm a proud graduate from Westchester Community College. And for those in there, take advantage of what's out there. Take advantage of the coaches, the athletic director. Let them guide and point you. And you know what? You look back, fond memories. And I wish all of you the very, very best.
Well, Jack, thank you, Jack. That's a great message. I want to give people the opportunity to ask some questions. And so feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat and I'll read them off as they come in. So type them in. Let's see where we're at right now. Oh, we have some, looks like we have a few in there first. I'll start with those. Okay. How old were you when you retired from the FBI?
Let's see. I was 54. In the way the FBI works, you have to do 20 years of service and be above 50. So I did 26 years. I originally was going to do 20. Then I was going to do 25 and then packed it in at 26. But it's 20 years of service now to get in the FBI. Has a great pension plan. Great work. You work. One of the things about the FBI, we work over 260 violations. So we're not just limited to drugs or bank robberies or organized crime. We have foreign counterintelligence, white collar crime, cyber. So there's great opportunities to work amazing cases at the FBI.
Great. Thank you for that. Janet Farrell wants to thank you for your work with Guardians of Rescue. So.
Well, thank you. I thank them too. I mean, it's a great organization. They do amazing, amazing work, the men and women there throughout the country, and never a dull moment. And kudos to Robin Messeri, who is the president, and all the others involved. My contribution pales in comparison to what these volunteers all do.
We have a question in regards to your book. You and I have spoken about it in the past, where you've mentioned that they were looking to make a movie about your life and based on the book. Is that something that's still in the works, or is there still a chance that that could happen?
Well, they started off with the movie. I mean, I'm fortunate to be signed on with Steven Soderbergh and Michael Schamberg, great producers and, of course, director. They were going the movie angle, and then about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, they switched gears to want to do an episodic series. So because of the pandemic, things are on hold. It's getting old and frustrating since my book came out in 2008. So I've learned that, hey, you know what? I'm not going to get excited over it. When it happens, I believe it. But I am blessed to have a team like Michael Schamberg and Stacy Scher and John Henson, and of course, Steven Soderbergh. I mean, so it's in their hands, and I'm hopeful that they'll come through for a movie or a show.
That would be great. That would be great. Look forward to seeing that. HS, how hard was it to be an undercover agent in an area that you grew up in, knowing that at any moment you could have been made?
Yeah, that was tough. But you know what? I tried not to think about it because otherwise it would just consume me. Now, I work, like I said, so many other cases where, you know, like up in Jackson Heights and as well as Washington Heights. So it was different then. But working with organized crime, I was concerned. I try to control and become less visible, you know, of not going to a lot of social clubs. I went to a couple of them, avoid places where I didn't have the control factor. Like, for instance, Rails. I drove the old man to Rails. I didn't want to go into Rails because there were probably people I would know at Rails. So, you know, you try to pick and choose what's good. But listen, it was in God's hands. I can't explain it why I wasn't compromised. I came very close once with a woman who was friends with one of the soldiers, and she shows up with him. And I had met her a couple of weeks before at a friend of mine's restaurant. It was just, how you doing? But you have to assume when you go, how you doing, from an introduction, afterwards the guy goes, oh, he's an FBI agent. Well, she didn't say anything. So I don't know whether she just didn't recognize me, which I find hard to do because a guy my size is about very recognizable, you know? So again, it was all in God's hands, and that's how I was able to get out of that, I guess.
Great. Um, what was your favorite part of being an undercover agent?
I guess was the when you knew you had the guy, you know, when he would believe what you're selling, you know, because we're really like actors, you know. So here you are, you're playing this role. Okay, I'm a drug dealer, I'm an organized crime guy, I'm this and that, and then all of a sudden you get in your role, and that person like believes your stuff, you know. And stuff is the kind word of saying it, you know, the PG part of it. But when he believes that, you scratch your head sometimes, and that is to me was the favorite part because you had him. You know, it wasn't like second doubt, like, oh, you know, I've seen undercovers go and they go, oh man, I don't think this guy bought my act. He's getting leery. But I feel good that during my time, I was never patted down for a wire. Now, I've asked myself that a million questions. Was it because I was prepared for the case, whether I had good informants who brought me in, or maybe because of my size? But then I said, well, that's a double-edged sword, because if I was ever in a death situation, I mean, I would probably say to the guy, hey, listen, you can't kill me, man. I'm an FBI agent. And he's going to look at me and he's going to laugh. He says, what, are you kidding me? You're not an FBI agent. You don't look like an FBI agent. So to me is that was always what I thought that, you know, being as an undercover was.
Thank you for that. This one's a good one. I guess you'll have to decide if you want to answer it or not. Who is the scariest mobster you ever encountered?
Good question. Probably be Robert Vaccaro. I actually became good friends with Robert Vaccaro. He was epitomized what a gangster is. He was low profile, very smart guy, very, very like, he was like a fox, you know? He was like, he knew what he was doing, yet we spent time talking about sports. He was always, but he had that in his eye. You know, after a while, you meet people, so many people like you have where good people, bad people, there's just something there. And he struck me as, and of course, he was the guy involved in Bloomingdale's when he grabbed the candlestick and he hit this guy over the head and almost killed him on the spot. And that's when I saw that part of his world. But I would say Robert, although a good guy, he could snap like this.
Well, it's funny you mention that because that's actually the next question was, I'll read it verbatim because it's worded in an interesting way. I know you had an incident at Bloomingdale's in White Plains where you were given, were you given the option of opting out at that moment since you were so closely associated with that area, knowing that that's right down the street from WCC?
Yeah. You know, the answer to that is no, because when you're out there with the mob guys, you don't have an option. What happens is things are very fluid. You go out to dinner and the guy goes, we're going to go for a ride. You can't say like, where are we going? Are we going to go here? Are we going to go there? You just tag along and you got to like bless yourself. Like, I hope this is a good ride, you know? And next thing you know, we're at Bloomingdale's because he's going after this guy, Petey Chops, that hasn't been reporting. And in the organized crime, that's a no-no. Because if you operate under that umbrella of organized crime, where it offers you that safety, that security that in the criminal world does, but you're not kicking money up, that's a no-no. So Greg De Palma was fed up that this guy was making that kind of money, and he was never giving him any envelopes. So we went over there. He went there to talk to the guy. The problem is it escalated to that getting hit over the head with a candlestick and possibly stabbed because this guy was mouthing off. He mouthed off to the skipper, to the captain, and he mouthed off to Robert. So that's, you know, what happened in that case. So I didn't have the option to say, where are you going? Many times he would just say, hey, we're going for a ride. Okay, well, it could be my last ride, you know? And it wasn't that I carried a gun, because mobsters don't carry guns unless they're going to whack somebody because of the New York laws. You know, you get stopped. They know the FBI follows the mobsters, and they know if they get pulled over and they get searched, they find a gun. He's doing 5 or 10. So you bring a gun only when you're doing action. So I figured to myself, listen, I think I could handle myself. I was in the back, you know, the guy's in the back. I don't know. You start thinking of scenarios to protect yourself. But yeah, I did not have an option to get bail out of that, nor would I, because I didn't know what we were doing. We were just we're going for a ride. Next thing you know, I'm in Bloomingdale's, and then we're going after Petey Chops.
Wow. This next question, I'm going to read it to you the way it's written. I don't know the context in particular. Maybe there's something that you can get out of it. It says, how do you deal with photos or video of you when you were an undercover? So I don't know if that's in reference to, you know, people seeing you and maybe you being made somehow, or.
Yeah, I get that a lot. You know, you worried about your safety. You know, the mob is smarter than that. Okay. They know that killing an FBI agent, okay, it's bad for business. They know that if you do this, okay, that we're going to unleash all our resources on stopping your money flow, on hassling you, charging you with every imaginable crime. That's bad for business. It's all about making money. Now, grant you, could be a situation with some low-level associates having a couple of drinks. Next thing you know, he's got macho in him, and he confront me. But I don't hang out in those kind of places, you know. And as far as what you hear, originally there was supposed to be a contract on me. I don't buy that there are contracts in FBI. If you're the boss and I want to whack you, Mike, I just tell whack them. I don't say whack them and we'll give you 500,000. It's an order.
Right.
When you're in the mob, you play what the bosses tell you. Go whack this guy, done. Now, of course, like I was told, I was an earner, so they're not going to use me. They're going to use a shooter. They're going to use a guy who does that because he can't make money with his mind, but he can make money with his fist. So when you hear, oh, the guy had a contract on his life, find that hard to believe. They just will not do that. And then also, if I whack you, what do I collect? Do I go knocking on the door of the social club and say, hey, I whacked Michael, where's my money? You're going to go whack next.
Sure. I think you answered that well. I think that's what they were looking for, at least for that part of it. Janet asks, or she points out that you said you had multiple apartments, multiple sets of jewelry, different wardrobes. She thinks you said in your book that you had multiple phones.
Yes.
What's the story about your daughter asking you what your name is after hearing you answer with a different name at a different time?
Yeah, when I was rolling in these cases, you know, like I said, I never really made it home, but when I did, was to see my wife and daughter. So I would lay out all my phones, and my phones were these disposable phones, we used to call it, you know, where you can buy them at 7-Eleven. So I would lay down my phones on there. And then, of course, I would have my Greg DePalma phone, which is my priority phone. The rest of these weren't. So they would either come in, and sometimes I have it on speaker, and you would hear the voicemail message. So what she would hear is the walkie-talkie, because remember where he spanked me for not answering his call, and I would hear, Jackie boy, and he had that distinct voice like this. He talked very raspy. So, Jackie boy, pick up the phone. And my daughter would know that voice, and that's the bad man calling you, Daddy. And then she would hear me sometimes making reservations when I'd be home, like I got to go to Florida. I got to go here, making hotel reservation using different names. And she said to me once, Daddy, what's your real name? So I said, honey, as long as I'm here, I'll always be Daddy. That's all you got to worry about.
Wow.
But with her, she grew up thinking she was Italian. My daughter grew up in this make-believe world that when I would come home, my neighbors, we all laugh afterwards when we get together. They would see me one dressed in my guayabera, like I'm some kind of drug lord. Then they would see me dressed like a mob guy in my Sergio Tacchini, tracksuit, which is another funny story. This tracksuit, we all had tracksuits in all colors. But hey, nobody ever asked me to go work out. There's no working out in the mob. You just dress like this, you know? So anyway, so they would see that and they would look at it and go, what the heck is this guy? What is he in the witness protection program? And that's what they tell me. They said, we thought you were in the witness protection program.
Wow.
So
Wow.
yeah, it was a tough, listen, it's not just what I experienced, but other undercovers experience. When you come home, you want to spend time with your quality time with your family because you're not going to, you don't know when you're going to see them again. You know, you may not see them for 3-4 weeks, which at times, sometimes I did.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, we have just a couple more questions. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know we've kind of gone over a little bit here, but we'll answer the last two. This must be a criminal justice major. What security clearance did you have? Was it secret or maybe even top secret?
I think, you know, that's funny. The FBI automatically grants you a secret clearance, I guess, so to speak. Then they have different versions. Like if you work foreign counterintelligence, that may be a top secret. But, you know, regular agents do have access to secret, but they don't have access to the top secret. Those are all different classifications depending on the work you do, which is fine because in the Bureau, we operate on what it's called the need to know. Like if I go to you, Mike, say, Mike, what are you working on? Well, need to know. What do you want to know? So we try to keep that security aspect, but if you're working criminal, it's pretty much the lower level of the security clearance because we're just working bad guys, unless I started working some national security cases, which I have worked, but I didn't get any special knighting of a top secret or whatever. I'm sure the agents that I worked for did have that.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay, great. Thank you for that. All right. And I think this will be our last one. Um, maybe a good way to end. What was your favorite case to work and why?
Oh boy. Um, there's been so many, but the question would be better is which case all came together? Like meaning the guys who you worked with, the supervisors you worked with, the people above them you worked with. So in other words, everything worked. There was no, you know, no problems at all with somebody saying you can't do this or this and that. Had to be the Boston corruption case, which is not in my book because I actually did it as I was retiring. But there I had these quality agents that worked. The supervisor was amazing. Their boss was amazing. And also the other undercovers that I worked with. Nothing went wrong. Everything came out like they said it was going to work out. Wound up locking up about 7 Boston police officers. One did 25 years. Picture that. That's how dirty this guy was. So that's kind of the case. But the other cases, yeah, I had a lot of fun when I worked on the drug squad. I mean, we were putting people away. They were all funny stories, going to Atlantic City, flying the Bureau plane, loads of dope, capturing tractor trailers of dope, taking down 20 keys of heroin. All of that is fun, but that to me was like, we didn't have a problem. Everything just worked smoothly, and very rare when you work in law enforcement that everything works smoothly. And there in Boston, it did.
Wow. Well, I'd like to wrap up just by thanking everyone for being here tonight. I know we have people from campus. We have our coaches, our student athletes. I want to thank our coaches for getting behind this event tonight and promoting it towards our student athletes. And you know, I want to thank our staff for helping me put this together and helping me, you know, work the participant room and the waiting room and everything. So thank you guys. And then most of all, Jack Garcia, thank you so much. It's been an honor. We really appreciate you coming on with us tonight. We look forward to the day that, you know, we can see you in person again sometime on campus.
Yes, and the honor was mine. I mean, what an honor to have to go back to where, you know, my great times began. And I wish everyone out there the best of luck. It's a great school. I love it. I'm one of the biggest fans and one of the biggest, literally and figuratively, alumni.
That's right. That's right. Well, Good night, everybody.
Good
Good
night.
luck on your final, students, and everyone. Have a happy and a healthy holiday season. And we hope to see you in person in 2021.
Stay safe, everyone. Bye.